the Paleo-Marxist Citizen-Smith Tribute Act that's offered by the opposition frontbench. For economic security, greater opportunity, sustainable investment in our public services. These and many other reasons.
Point of order, George Howarth.
If you could help me, is the term pillar considered unparliamentary?
I don't think that word was used. I think the word was paleo. I think the word was paleo, if I understood correctly. That is rather unfair that the point of order came when it did, and the honourable gentleman should certainly have 10 seconds to finish his speech.
Economic security, greater opportunity and sustainable investment in our public services. These and many other reasons are why Dudley South and this House can have confidence in Her Majesty's government this evening.
Jonathan Reynolds, paleo.
To say I have no confidence in Her Majesty's government, and in doing so, I'm not going to address the domestic record of this government. I wish I had time, because this has been a government of hunger and homelessness, and that's a record that needs revealing. But clearly in 3 minutes that isn't possible. But what I do want to say is this. The reason the government genuinely deserved to lose this vote today is because there's only one reason for this government's existence. There's only one reason why the Prime Minister is the Prime Minister, and that's Brexit. The job of this government was to deliver Brexit. After the referendum, the majority of MPs accepted the result and wanted to work pragmatically on a deal to secure the best terms of our new relationship. We didn't do so lightly. Don't forget the referendum was only called to try and unsolve some internal problems in the Conservative Party. David Cameron expected another hung parliament. He thought the Liberals would be in coalition with him again and he could drop the idea entirely, and he got it wrong. And as a result, we all got the most divisive politics this country has had in the modern era. We all got the denigration of expertise, of reason, becoming the new normal. All of us saw our friend murdered in that campaign. And yet, despite that, there was no doubt that this House had, and still does have, a cross-party majority for a Brexit deal. But how did the Prime Minister respond to that? Did she reach out across party lines? No. Did she seek to unite Leavers and Remainers? No. Did she provide leadership on the big questions? Absolutely not. Instead, we had it played from the beginning for narrow party advantage. Reasonable concerns about how customs would work, how the banking system would function, the rights of EU citizens, even what queue and passport control EU citizens would use, were first dismissed and then quite cynically and falsely were presented as opposition to Brexit itself. And when an election was called, despite the Prime Minister giving her word, Downing Street briefed it as a chance to crush the saboteurs. Well, how ironic that the biggest saboteur of all to the deal has turned out to be the Prime Minister herself. And it is her deal which has been crushed. But on that point on leadership of the big issues, now we all appreciate the Conservative Party is irrevocably split on this issue, and a decision on the final destination risks losing one half entirely. We appreciate that. But the answer to that is to reach out. It is to go for a conversation with all of the House of Commons. Instead of that, we got the member for Uxbridge appointed Foreign Secretary, travelling around Europe insulting our friends. We got the nationalistic rhetoric of the Citizens of Nowhere speech. We got the idea at Conservative Conference, let's list foreign workers as if we're living in 1930s Germany. We had the Chancellor threatening our friends and allies with economic warfare, like the UK was some overgrown school bully, all of which has squandered centuries and centuries of goodwill and landed us where we were. It is this Prime Minister, this government, these red lines, this strategy that are to blame for bringing this country to the abyss. They have nothing left to offer, and in the national interest they should go.
Antoinette Sandbach.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, it was a pleasure to follow the member for Staley-Bridge and Hyde, although I couldn't disagree more with him, with his characterisation of him. I remember a Labour Prime Minister that promised this country a referendum on the Lisbon Treaty, and virtually his last act in government was to sign it and renege on that promise to the British people. And I feel that the resentment after years of broken Labour promises in relation to referendums has been a large bears a large part of the blame in the outcome of the referendum vote, not to mention the absolutely miserable way in which the Leader of the Opposition failed to campaign or make a proper case for remaining in the EU during the referendum debate. So I will take no lectures from the party opposite. And when he talks about reaching out, there is no explanation as to why, how the Labour policy will get over the line in terms of state aid. because they say that they want a customs union, but they don't want to accept rules on state aid. They say they want a customs union and can negotiate a better deal, but don't want to accept the rules on free movement. And the reality of the Labour Party position is that it would fail its own 6 tests. Now, I am someone who, in this House, has shown a willingness to work across party to get a decent and sensible Brexit result, despite the fact that I personally believe that the best deal that we have is remaining in the EU. I made a promise to try and implement the referendum result, but I do not see that there have been any constructive proposals from the front bench on the other side. And the reason why I have confidence in this government, and I do, is because although the press is taken over by Brexit, we have been getting on with the job in this country. We have been delivering in so many other ways. 39,000 people, workers in my constituency, have been taken out of tax because of this government's proposals. And I remember Gordon Brown introducing a 10p tax rate on those earning just over £4,500. £4,500, and they had the lowest paid had to pay tax. Exactly. Now, a low-paid worker in my constituency will not pay tax until they are earning at least £12,500. That is one of many achievements that this government has made. Look at the new benefit that we have introduced in terms of paid parental leave. It is one of the first new benefits that we've introduced for many years. 2 weeks paid parental leave for parents. That is a significant achievement. We are seeing very good environmental policies coming out of DEFRA. There is a good record to be proud of.
Thank you. Emma Hardy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and it's a pleasure to follow the member for Edinburgh. The unsettled mood that we feel here in the chamber today, and in fact the unsettled mood that we feel across the whole of Parliament, is reflected across the whole of our society. There is a feeling when you go out there into the communities and a desire for change, a desire for something else. Now, this feeling and desire for change manifests itself in different ways, but we would be wrong to ignore it and to underestimate the significance of it. It manifests itself in the anger that is felt in our communities, including the increased hate that all of us across the House are receiving. And it manifests itself in the despair and the disassociation of democracy and the lack of faith in anybody probably standing here in Parliament today. So this moment is a pivotal moment, and it is more than I will say about whether you think we should have a Labour government or Conservative government, though of course the answer is Labour. It's more about how do we give back our trust and faith to ordinary people, because this feeling and this mood for change is not going to go away, because people are exhausted. They're exhausted by austerity. I don't think anybody in this House appreciates quite how draining poverty is, how the daily grind can get you down. And if nothing else, I would like every member here to reflect just on this statistic, even if you ignore every other word I say, that across Yorkshire there has been a 30% increase in the number of suicides. My constituency covers the Humber Bridge, and I've mentioned this before, that the Humber Bridge has become a hotspot for suicides, people driving from around the country to come there and take their own lives. What greater damning indictment of this government can there be that they have left people in such a state of despair, a feeling that they have no future whatsoever? And what answers are they being offered? But nothing. More arguments opposite, more people tearing into each other opposite, where the people in our community continue to suffer. They suffer when they go to the NHS. And the nonsense about all these better, good and outstanding schools. And with respect, I suggest that the Minister goes and actually checks, the member goes and actually checks when the last time these schools were inspected. And that might give him a more accurate figure if he's going to start spouting that out at us. Crime is increasing and people are feeling unsafe in their homes. The antisocial behaviour that so many people here probably ignore because the gates to their properties allow them to cannot be ignored by the people in our communities. They're feeling unsafe in their homes. We have a moment now to really make a difference. It is in our gift to give people that change that they need. We can channel that change for need into a vision that is positive and a vision for hope, but only if we vote down this government and bring a Labour government that will truly deliver for everybody in our country.
Even though I do respect the comments made by the Honourable Lady from Case upon Hull and Hessel, I'm concerned that she sees everything in a very different light to I. I'm much more optimistic about our future. But I think the motion before us today may seem very simplistic, and yet it raises points that go much, much further. We really are in the midst of a battle for the heart and soul of our country, and all those things we hold very dear. The decisions we take in this place today and over the coming weeks will really irreversibly change the course of our history. They will shape Britain's standing in the world for a generation, and in the process will perhaps determine the very future of this Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, which has served our nation through war and peace for the best part of thousands of years. On the central question of Europe, which has led us to this position today, I make the following points. Like the long-time Brexiteers, I am fully committed to ensuring that the UK can end its membership of the European Union on the 29th of March at 11 p.m, as set down in law. Nothing less than an agreement which ends the free movement of people, in addition to returning full control over our money and our laws, is acceptable either to myself or to the majority of the people of Erewash who voted to leave in the referendum in June 2016. My message for the Remainers is I voted to remain in the European Union, but we lost that argument, and consequently the UK will be leaving the EU. Europe may have brought us to this point, but that does not detract from the fact that the single biggest threat to the safety, security and prosperity of our country is sat on the benches opposite. The choice before us today is very clear. A socialist government who, within hours of being returned to office, would cause a run on the pound, and those aren't my words, they're the words of the Shadow Chancellor. That's true. A socialist government that would drive investment out of Britain through its ideological pursuit of nationalisation. And a socialist government whose own backbenchers advocate the confiscation of council houses bought under the Right to Buy scheme. A socialist government that would make my constituents poorer in every sense of the word. And I can't let that happen to my constituents of Erewash. I cannot countenance such outcomes, and the government has my full support and full confidence today and in the future.
Thank you. Geraint Davis.
Mr. Speaker, Margaret Thatcher famously quoted Attlee in saying that referenda were the instruments of demagogues and dictators because Hitler used them to adopt supreme power and to basically invade other countries after rearming. So my view for no confidence of the Prime Minister isn't simply because she's doubled the debt, created poverty and social injustice, but basically that she thinks the advisory referendum is an unconditional mandate to Brexit under any costs and any circumstances without consulting with the people on whether this represents their reasonable expectations. The people were offered more money, more trade, control over their laws, control over migration. But in fact, they haven't got any of those things. We'll have to pay £39 billion. There'll be a squeezing of the economy. There'll be less jobs. There'll be less trade. We won't be with Team EU in terms of negotiating with big players like China. Northern Ireland will be an open border for immigration via Dublin. We won't control our immigration. And in any case, if we did, we'd just switch a cultural neighbour to more distant immigration in any case. There's no evidence that the people of Britain support the deal. It's a betrayal of conservatism because we move away from the most established market in the world and break up the union, a betrayal of socialism because we basically have a smaller cake to divide more equally. It's bad for our economy, our security, our environment and our common values. So it's my view that I have no confidence in the Prime Minister because she has no confidence in the people to make a judgment on the deal she's delivered. If they want it, let's go ahead. But otherwise, unless we don't have that vote, we'll just wait another 2 years in the transition period when we could, in fact, have a vote on this, decide on reflection. It's better for all of us to remain, and we can have 2 years sorting out this country rather than having this situation where we're just talking about Brexit and Britain is burning around us. Yes, there will be some anger if we have a people's vote, but I put this to you, that there will be absolute rage if we don't and Brexit goes forward. People voted to leave. They didn't vote to leave their jobs. And Brexit, which is now being seen, warts and all, and we're also seeing the fact that Europe is a much more virtuous place than before. There was a massive defeat last night. Yes, the Prime Minister needs to look cross-party at all the options. If we can't agree any deal, let's put the deal we've got to the people and they can decide whether to continue. In the meantime, I'm calling for a general election, but if we don't get a general election, we should have a people's vote. The Labour Party should stand up for Remain, and when we win that, there should be an election, because we'll have a government which was elected on strong, stable Brexit, will be weak, unstable, and Remain, and then we will deliver a Labour government and a better Britain in the future.
Spurghardt.
Obviously, I'm not terribly delighted that we're having a vote of confidence in the Conservative government, but I suppose I might thank the opposition for bringing my party back together today. Because whilst we were heavily divided last night, I can be confident that we are all going to go through the same lobby together, and it will be a bonding experience. So thank you very much for doing that for us. It's quite right, of course, that we are having a vote of no confidence. We find ourselves in a peculiar hung parliament in which, as the Leader of the Opposition said, the government suffered a major defeat last night, suffered a defeat on a money bill. It's quite right that the confidence of the House is tested. But we are all quite aware of what is going to happen. The government is going to win this vote this evening, and then we are going to have to move on. And the most interesting question is not about this vote, which is a foregone conclusion. It's about what is going to happen after that. We know what the Prime Minister is going to do. She has offered to reach out and speak to other corners of the Commons and look for some consensus, but what we still don't know is what the opposition is asking for. And the fact that we have been put on the spot for a vote of no confidence when the opposition hasn't said what it would take to the public in the event of a general election is quite frankly shameful. I mean, it reminds me very much of how in 1997 the Labour Party managed to breeze into power without telling the public. Well, yes, they won by a convincing majority, but they didn't tell the public in advance what their policy was on the single European currency. It had to be wrung out of them when they were already in power. So the Labour Party has track record on this. If the Labour Party wants to go to the country, as it does, then it at least should have the courtesy to tell the public what it is going to take into that vote. But let's imagine that it did go through tonight. Let's imagine record debt is what we would have. £1,000 billion of extra debt, £35,000 extra for everyone who lives in this country. That is what the Honourable Lady's Party is offering this country. That is what the Honourable Lady's Party is offering my voters out there and my tax-paying constituents. Very happy to give way and take the time.
The Honourable Gentleman, perhaps because he is rather younger than me, seems to have forgotten that when the Labour Party took office, waiting lists in the NHS were 18 months for some specialities.
Died of cancer.
Under the Labour government, there were practically no waiting lists in some specialities, and that is a record we are all proud of.
And when the Honourable Lady's Party left power, we had record debt, a crashed economy, a loss of confidence in our foreign policy after a disastrous Iraq war. That party ran this country into the ground, and 8 years later we have record employment, we have rising wages, we have everything that a sensible, evenly minded, well-balanced economy has brought mature.
Order. A very unseemly atmosphere, but the Honourable Gentleman is at least still smiling, and that is to be welcome. Order. Let's hear the Honourable.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. The truth is that the Labour Party left power under an enormous cloud. Everybody knows it. They left after a disastrous 13 years in office, which had seen the economy destroyed, and we on this side of the House are united in our desire to make sure that they don't have an opportunity to do it again. Because, let's be frank, the Blair-Brown years were, compared to what would come in a general election this year, should this party, the party opposite, force upon us, was a golden age. I mean, you know, we would rather have Blair and Brown than Corbyn and McDonnell any day of the week. But those options are not available to the British public.
Speaker, can I first thank the Leader of the Opposition in his absence for tabling this vote of no confidence, which I will be supporting in the lobbies this evening. Mr Speaker, I came into politics challenged with trying to make a difference to the lives of ordinary people of Bradford West, to try to be part of a system that is about putting people first and not about people clinging to power and positions and self-preservation being at the heart of everything they do. I have lived experience of what destitution and poverty is. So when a generation later I have constituents that come into my surgery in sheer destitution and literally crying due to not knowing how they're going to feed their children and meet their very basic needs, when the reality of insecure jobs and in-work poverty and whilst having dependence leads to further destitution, then the question has to be whether this government is fit for purpose. From my short time in this House, Mr Speaker, I feel the real tragedy for me is that whilst the nail in the coffin for this debate has been yesterday's catastrophic defeat of any government in the history of our democracy, for me and my constituents, Mr Speaker, the truth is that this government hasn't been fit for purpose for a very long time. This government wasn't fit for purpose when the UN Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty described levels of child poverty in the UK as not just a disgrace, but a social calamity and an economic disaster in the fifth largest economy in the world. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it pursued the policy of rolling out a hostile environment leading to tragedies with the Windrush scandal. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it was found in contempt of this Parliament. This government isn't fit for purpose when it is repeatedly defeated in the courts by single parents and people with disabilities and is forced to go back to the drawing board on its own policies. This government wasn't fit for purpose when it failed again last year to stop the increase in homelessness on the streets of Britain, and even failed to save the life of the poor man that died outside the doors of the Parliament just weeks ago. This government wasn't fit for purpose when those on the benches opposite decided to use food banks for photo ops. This government isn't fit for purpose when programmes like I, Daniel Blake, is many people's reality are no longer a fiction. This government has consistently acted in the interests of the few and not the many, offering tax giveaways to the rich whilst viciously cutting services for the most vulnerable in this country. The government wasn't fit for purpose when the Prime Minister knew her deal was dead before recess and yet chose to sabotage and hold Parliament hostage by delaying the vote, and the list goes on. Those 117 of the colleagues across the benches, when they voted that this Prime Minister was not fit to govern them and their party, how can they go back to the electorate and say that this government is that Prime Minister is fit to leave the country and not them?
Bill Grant.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the honourable member for Bradford West. When members consider their position on the matter of confidence tonight, I would argue that this government's record must be assessed, not just on the basis of one vote, however fundamental that issue is for the nation's future, but on this government's record in office. Three practical measures of a government's relative success are taxation levels for working families, employment levels and investment in public services. It must be remembered that it is this government which has cut the taxes for 32 million working people in order that they can keep more of the money that they earn. It is this government which has seen unemployment not simply reduce but plummet to a record low. And it's this government which is investing an extra £20+ billion in the NHS for our future health. And through Barnett Consequential, that will benefit NHS Scotland immensely. In the same period, all that the opposition front bench has achieved is an ever-changing conviction on each issue with little consensus of opinion. In fact, the only consensus seems to be that the government has apparently got it wrong on every issue. This is clearly not the case, and the facts do not support the opposition's somewhat gloomy assessment. This government is pressing ahead with ongoing investment in research and development, with growth deals throughout the country, such as the one emerging in Ayrshire. It recognises the importance of the environment with the 25-year environmental plan, never been done before in the United Kingdom. It has secured a stable economy from a very weak and unstable inheritance, and it listens when things need to change, particularly in relation to universal credit. That is not a government in crisis, as members opposite allege. They are simply doing this to secure an election, but this is a government which is getting on with the business of governing. The Prime Minister has worked incredibly hard on these and other issues over the last 2 years, and I would earnestly encourage honourable members to support the government tonight. With everything else that is going on, with this party being the only one, the only party with a clear desire to honour the referendum, this is not the time to be holding an unnecessary and unwanted general election. It is time to get on with what we have been asked to do before our constituents lose faith in every parliamentarian in this House. In closing, Mr Speaker, I have every confidence in Her Majesty's Conservative and Unionist government, and I will be voting for it tonight.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, last night's defeat was an extraordinary humiliation for the Prime Minister. And if ever there was a situation to be described as chickens coming home to roost, it was this. For this is a national calamity of the Prime Minister's own making. It was this Prime Minister who failed to reach out across the House to find consensus on a way forward from the narrow win for Leave in the 2016 referendum. It was the Prime Minister who painted herself into a corner with a series of bright red lines designed only to appease the most extreme Brexiteers in her party. And it was the Prime Minister who triggered Article 50 far too prematurely. But crucially, though, it was the Prime Minister who has also resolutely failed to tackle any of the underlying injustices that drove the 2016 referendum result. Many people voted Leave because they believe that the status quo in this country is intolerable. And they are right. It is. We are a country of grotesque inequalities, not just between classes, but geographically between regions, especially between North and South, and between thriving cities and failing towns within the same region. Last year, the Commission on Social Mobility identified the 30 worst places for social mobility, and every single one of them voted to leave. Now, I don't think that that was a coincidence. So the Prime Minister's mantra about bringing the country back together rings very hollow when you look at the evidence. Welfare cuts since 2010 have cost lone parent households an average of over £5,000, increasing child poverty rates in those households from 37% to 62%. The NHS has endured the longest period of austerity in its history. The evidence goes on. So today has to be the day when we start to change the conversation about Brexit and about the future of Britain. Not by slavishly repeating that Brexit is the will of the people, but by really and genuinely hearing the voices of those who have been economically and politically excluded for decades. The millions of people who rightly chose to give the establishment an almighty kicking in June 2016 deserve their concerns to be addressed and properly resolved. Now, Mr Speaker, I believe that a people's vote, if it learns the lessons from the failed Remain campaign of 2016, can be the vehicle that we need to have that honest debate in this country. It will be the chance to be able to move on from the divisive and dangerous place that we're in by committing to Project Hope rather than Project Fear. And, Mr Speaker, whoever is in number 10 must be someone who is going to be able to put that issue back to the people. Because a general election that is fought by two of the biggest parties who both have a commitment to Brexit does not take us forward on this issue. So while, of course, I want to get rid of that toxic government opposite, I also want to make sure that we resolve this most pressing issue and get this question back to the people, because Parliament has shown itself incapable of resolving. It needs to go back to the people.
Thank you. Julian Knight.
Mr Speaker, as ever, it is a huge pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady from Brighton Pavilion. Polls. We've heard a lot about polls today. I'll give you a couple. First of all, 52-48. We all know those numbers. And I believe it is intrinsic, it is absolutely beholden on this House to respect that referendum result. The other poll is 34%. That is the current Labour Party polling. quite incredibly, at this particular time, 34%. And the reasons for that were encapsulated, I think, Mr. Speaker, by the Honourable Member for Barrow and Furness, who said quite simply that the Shadow Chancellor and the Leader of the Opposition are unfit for high office. And I think as people get closer to the potential of a buying decision, they would see that very starkly indeed. And the other reason for the 34% is these 6 tests, the magic unicorn tests, designed to fail. And the public aren't foolish. They aren't going to be hoodwinked by this. They know intrinsically that this is sophistry of the very most politically contemptible sort. And I am going to say now to members opposite, at some point later today, tomorrow, the grown-ups are going to have a conversation about what the party opposite actually want out of this.
Will my honourable friend give way?
I will give way.
Does my honourable friend agree with me that what people tell me and my constituency in Basingstoke and businesses in Basingstoke is they want certainty?
Absolutely.
How can they get certainty when they have challenges in the government and also rejecting the government's plans yesterday?
Absolutely. And certainty is all. And as JLR, who I'll be speaking about in the adjournment debate, they want certainty as well. And I really do think it's a little bit rich when people talk about the rights of EU citizens and UK citizens, and then they reach it to deal that protect those rights. Now, I would say that a second referendum is itself a stain on this Parliament. The division would be enormous, and as I say, we have been entrusted. I also would say that no deal makes no sense to me in the dislocation that this could cause to our economy. I know that people talk about stockpiling and emergency provision, etc. But the reality is, what happens when those stocks actually run out? And what happens as well if we do end up with dislocation? What happens if we then have to go to the EU to negotiate certain terms at that particular point? We would be in a very weak position. So I would say both those things are out. So we have to come together sensibly. Despite this stunt today, this way in which, frankly, we're going to see honourable members filling out their Facebook pages with how many different times they can say particular words in order basically to link in with their local momentum groups. It is time for sensible people, growing-up people, to actually face the consequences, the circumstances we face in. That is what the public want. They do not like this spectacle at all. Now, when it comes to the achievements of this particular government, I would say in 2010 we inherit 11% of GDP. Now, let me just be very clear to you, clear to the House, that 11% of GDP is such an enormous sum that you cannot go borrowing that sum for very long. Eventually, the markets call in your loans, and you end up having to pay such a high interest rate that you end up in a depression. So we had to sort that out as a government. But we did that while protecting the NHS. And we have announced an increase in NHS spending, which is twice the level proposed, increase-wise, than Labour proposed at the 2017 general election. Now, not everything, is perfect in that respect. There are issues, and I really have to say that we are working towards trying to solve those ongoing issues. But when it comes to the big matter of the economy, when it comes to jobs, when it comes to healthcare, when it comes to 1 million kids in better, outstanding schools, this government is delivering. We have to get through Brexit, and we will deliver more.
Andy Slaughter.
Mr. Speaker, the provocation for this debate is the unprecedented defeat of the central plank of the government's policy that should have led seamlessly to a general election. And in the Brexit debate earlier this week, I spoke about the threat that Brexit represents to the prosperity and the opportunity and the security of my constituents and to many of my businesses. But I also represent some of the poorest communities in the UK. Although I'm proud of the work it does, I'm not proud to have the busiest food bank in London. Last week I spent an afternoon at one of St Mungo's homeless hostels in West Kensington, talking to residents and staff. They told me that the annual street homelessness count that will be published on the 31st of January will show it has doubled in the last year. They gave me 3 reasons for that: universal credit, the increase in no recourse to public funds, and tenancy takeover, where drug dealers seize the premises of vulnerable tenants. So the war on the poor, the hostile environment, and a descent into lawlessness, 3 of the worst consequences of austerity. The cuts in police numbers, especially neighbourhood officers, is putting whole communities at risk. I spent part of New Year's Eve at a crime scene in Fulham, an attempted murder which led to the arrest of 40 people and the recovery of a number of dangerous weapons. I estimate that half of the people I now see in surgery have problems which would have made them eligible for legal aid before the passage of the LASPO Act. Yesterday, my CCG, looking to make £44 million of cuts to its budget, began to consult on reducing opening hours for urgent care centres and GPs. Not just bad in itself, but in direct contradiction to the NHS strategy that calls for an extension of those services to justify the closures of A&Es and emergency beds. For the first time in a generation, we're seeing year-on-year real terms cuts in schools' budgets. Inner city schools don't just educate, they give emotional and practical support to families that struggle with poverty and poor living standards. And perhaps the worst betrayal by this government is to cut funding for social housing by 80%, 100% under the former London Mayor, when 800,000 people are on waiting lists. Mr. Speaker, my local council and the Mayor of London do their best and effectively do what they can to alleviate the conditions I've described. But for real change, we need a Labour government. This Prime Minister's legacy will be to have ruined this country in half the time it took the Thatcher and Major governments. Enough is now enough. We need a general election and we need a Labour government.
Chris Green.
Speaker, this debate should be one of two halves. Firstly, it's right the opposition challenged the government on the government's record, but the second part ought to be the fact that the opposition seek to become the government itself. They should be presenting a vision for the country, and they have demonstrably failed to demonstrate that they have a vision for the country that they can deliver in a few weeks' time if they won an election. That part has been wholly absent from this debate so far. Now, on the referendum day 3 years ago, in 2016, during that referendum, I spent a great deal of time talking to constituents and visiting polling stations around my constituency in parts of Wigan and in parts of Bolton. And it was startling. On that day, the polling stations in the poorest neighbourhoods, the poorest communities, those polling stations had a turnout that they had never seen before, far higher than for local elections, far higher than for a general election. This vote on the referendum on the European Union reached out in a way that politicians here have never done before, or at least not for decades. This is one of the key reasons why it's so important to respect this referendum decision. These people who perhaps have never voted before, perhaps they've had the opportunity of decades to vote, and they have chosen to say that there is no election that's important enough that we actually want to engage. Now, this referendum was a vote where they decided to engage in politics, engage in the life of the country. And it's vital that this government now respects that decision. We are leaving the European Union on the 29th of March this year. If this decision is delayed by suspending Article 50 or even cancelling Article 50, that will be a sign to the electorate, all voters, whether leave or remain, that their decision is being disrespected. And worse still, if there's a second referendum to dismiss the first referendum, it will be a sign from this place, your vote was wrong. Get it right the second time. That is repugnant. That will be so damaging to our democracy. I urge the government, focus on delivering Brexit, focus on delivering on the 29th of March, use the opportunity, use the days we have left to get the best deal from the European Union, but on the 29th, we must leave.
Sir Edward Davey.
I'll be voting for this motion tonight, not just because of the failure of the government on Brexit, because of their failure on so many issues, rising crime, the railways, the social care disaster, the schools budget and so on. I think the speech earlier in this debate from the honourable member from Warrington North actually encapsulated the best. But on Brexit, which is obviously on everyone's mind, one has to ask, why is this government unable to deliver on Brexit? And it's fundamentally because the Conservative Party is split. It is absolutely divided. We saw that in the lobbies last night, but we've actually seen it, Mr. Speaker, in the record number of resignations from this Prime Minister's government. In just 3 years, we've seen 32 people resign from her government. Another dreadful record. This shows that this government is incapable. Is incapable of. I'll take them.
Well, no, the honourable gentleman has a number of shadow front benchers that have resigned since the current leader came to power.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was going to actually talk about a speech by the member for Brentford Ongar, who said this motion tonight might unite the Conservatives. It probably will, because a rafter of turkeys ain't going to vote for Christmas. But the ultimate division is still there, and that should worry people across our country, because this government and this party is incapable of delivering Brexit. It has shown that over the last 2.5 years. And that's why the Right Honourable Lady, the member for Putney, was right. The government now have to reach across the aisles. They have to talk to all parties, have to get Parliament to deliver this policy area. But if they're going to do that and do it successfully, they've got to do 3 things. Article 50 has to be extended. No deal has to be taken off the table. And the government has to show that when there is a deal agreed, that will be put to the British people with the option of remaining in the EU. That, I think, can get consensus. That could be delivered. That could bring the House together. At the moment, we're just hearing the Conservative Party blaming everyone else but themselves. They blame the Remainers. They blame the opposition. They blame the Governor of the Bank of England. Sometimes I think they're going to blame sunshine, moonlight, good times and boogie, Mr. Speaker. There's only one group to blame. It's the Conservative Party.
Thank you. Alex Chalk.
Mr. Speaker. A lot of people ask me, and I dare say every honourable member in this House, why on earth would you go into politics? And they ask it particularly at a time like this. But I know the answer, and I know the answer as a Conservative. It's because I believe to my bones in social mobility. And I want to make crystal clear, I expect there are people across this House who believe in that. But the issue that divides us is how you come up with solutions, how you go about achieving it, how you unlock potential and seek out the treasure that's in the heart of every man and woman. And I know it's as a Conservative Member of Parliament that it's been possible to provide opportunities in my community in Cheltenham that has allowed people to fulfil that potential. Because my community, although people don't realise it, they say, Cheltenham, for goodness sake, it must be the most affluent place in the country. Not a bit of it. We have some of the most deprived communities anywhere in our country, where people live in generational entrenched poverty. And what has this Conservative Party done for my community? £22 million for a cyber park in Cheltenham, which will allow the finest minds to come in and out of GCHQ to create startups which mean that if there is a person living nearby who has come from generational poverty, but they've got something about them, something which says, I want to better myself, I want to go forward, I want to provide for my family, and I want to build a future. That opportunity exists. Money that has come in the form of over 400 million for a road project. Now, you might say, oh, a road project, who cares about that? Road projects are what allow a local community to thrive. It's what allows opportunities to be generated and futures to be created. But it's not just about infrastructure projects. Recognising the issue of homelessness, it's this government that provided £1.3 million for social impact bonds. What does that mean? That means one-on-one support for individuals who can go and address the needs of the most vulnerable in our society, be that drug addiction, be that mental health problems, be that debt. And that has served to make a huge difference in my community, so that it's not just a stronger community economically, but a fairer one too. What's more, £3 million to help deliver social housing in Cheltenham, in Portland Place. So, of course, there is always room for improvement. Of course, there is always more to do. But on that issue of social mobility, which is the party that isn't just talking the talk, but walking the walk, it is this government that is achieving it, this government which is making a difference in my community, and that is why I will vote against this motion tonight.
Gregory Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to commence by saying, since I came into the House in 2001, I've seen a significant increase in the number of people in the chamber right across the divide who have come to speak and vote in favour and in defence of this United Kingdom, compared to what was the case some 17 years ago, and for that I and the people at home are eternally grateful for that, and I'm sure that is shared across the divide. I want to say, Mr Speaker, that I will be voting against the motion tonight because I retain confidence in this government on the terms and conditions contained in the confidence and supply motion that we entered into some time ago. But I want to, at this stage, offer a piece of critical advice to my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister. And it is this. In the past year and a half, I believe that her negotiations have not best served this United Kingdom. And I believe last night's defeat, the scale of the defeat, can offer her and us an opportunity for a revised position by her. And I believe that that should be a condition that she goes back to the EU and makes it very, very clear, just as she hasn't done up to now, that whenever they say a deal is only doable if it contains the backstop that we have arranged and agreed with you, that she goes back to them and says, agree is doable, an agreement is doable, but not on the terms and conditions of that backstop, because that backstop creates a division, a cleavage, a divorce within our United Kingdom, and we are not prepared to enter into any agreement that is based on that backstop. And it is only when she gets to that stage that we get Mr Juncker last night, as he said, after he realised the scale of the defeat, after the possibility of what may emerge beyond last night's defeat could emerge in subsequent weeks, when he made the statement, which I think has not been commented upon, it is that we, the EU, are determined to get a deal. He wasn't saying that 6 months ago. He wasn't saying that 6 weeks ago. But he is saying it now. And the reason he's saying it now is because the appearance of no deal on the horizon has now suddenly galvanised the EU nation-states, and our Prime Minister has got to take advantage of that now and has got to say to the EU, we are prepared to get a deal, but we are prepared to get a good deal and a reasonable deal, not a one-way deal like the deal that fell last night, but a deal that delivers both for the UK and for the EU. It is on that basis that I will be voting against the motion tonight, Mr Speaker.
Thank you. Rebecca Powell.
And I rise to speak because I believe that this government is the right government to carry on with its serious work that it has begun, not just on Brexit, but on so many other important issues affecting our daily lives. And because I believe that a chain of events that might lead to a general election will in no way be good for the country. And because I am genuinely fearful of what might happen if this great country, but especially our businesses, should get into the hands of the member for Islington North. Should he ever get his hands on the tiller, this country will not be in safe hands. An election will certainly not solve the impending business at hand, which is delivering on our relationship with the EU. So, I believe that this government is the best government to deliver for us, not just nationally, but also locally. That's what's really important to me as the MP for Taunton Deane. And in my constituency, since the Conservatives have been in power, we have delivered more than any other government. There are more people in work than ever before in Taunton Deane, more SMEs setting up. There is more funding coming our way thanks to a strong economy. That's why my calls for £79 million for the new theatres in the hospital were agreed to and accepted, and that's why we got an additional £11 million for more health services locally. We've had more funding for infrastructure, £28 million. We are upgrading the A358, we are upgrading the Toneway, we are upgrading the motorway junction. We've got £7 million to enable a road through Staple Grove where more housing is being built. We are building more housing than ever before in Taunton Deane, Mr Speaker, and that's because of this strong economy. There is a great deal going on, and more children in Taunton Deane are getting a better education than ever before, and we're building a new special school. All of these things are only possible with a strong economy and with an understanding of what business needs. We've cut the Labour's astonishing deficit by 4/5, which has restored the public finances. Finally, I want to touch on the environment, and it won't surprise people. This government has an unparalleled record on working for the environment, and we must continue with our great work, which is another good reason why we need to leave the EU. I am backing the Prime Minister. She will come up with a deal. We must do it with compromise. We must work as a team on these benches. We must listen to the other side, but we must pull off Brexit. And I'm confident that this government, with its track record on the economy and all of the other things it's delivered, including on the environment, is the right government to do, and to do it successfully and to do it fairly, so that we leave future generations able to carry on the good work we've set in place and to live in a fair and wonderful economy and take this great nation into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The famous phrase is that a fish rots from the head down. It is a recognition that bad leadership infects all that it touches. And what greater example of that than this present government? The rot isn't confined to Downing Street, it is infecting the whole country. Not strong and stable, but stubborn and self-obsessed. And Brexit is by far the clearest, but no means the only example. Frankly, the Prime Minister has turned Brexit into some modern-day bizarre Schleswig-Holstein question. Something that Palmerston himself claimed was so complicated only 3 people understood it. One was dead, one who'd been driven mad by it, and one who'd forgotten it altogether. But the truth is that this isn't a complicated situation. It's her red lines that have killed her deal. It's her red lines that have driven this Parliament mad. And it's her red lines that are best forgotten. This infectious failure has covered all bases. This is a government that can't organise a tailback on the M20. A government presiding over a shortage of nurses while stockpiling fridges. A government alienating our EU citizen neighbours whilst deporting our Windrush families. A government obsessed with what stickers are on the Speaker's wife's car, whilst ignoring the pleas for help with issues like knife crime. The roll call goes on and on. Universal credit, homelessness, the cost of living, the refugees crying out for sanctuary, the human rights of the women of Northern Ireland. At every turn, this government cannot get a grip, and those burning injustices burn harder as a result. This country is divided. This Parliament is divided. The deadlock is deepening, not dissolving, and the Prime Minister can't even be bothered to pick up a phone. That's right. No party can continue to prevaricate whilst the far right goes stronger. It will not stop with Brexit, and Brexit does not deal with the crisis of confidence in our politics we all now face. We are not the only country facing difficult choices or challenges, but we are the only country that thinks because it's the mother of all democracies, there's nothing wrong with how we approach things. Change has got to come for all our stakes. But for that to happen, it has to start at the top, and we have to stop the rot.
You merriman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to speak not just on behalf of Brenda from Bristol, but all of the Brendas in Bexhill and Battle, who are probably feeling right now that the last thing we all want is a general election. But what we do want is our Parliament and all of our MPs to work better together and fix the issues of our day. And I've enjoyed this afternoon because I've had the opportunity to listen to many feelings, hopes, aspirations. But it depresses me that we still are in a position where people would rather shout at each other in this chamber as opposed to reaching out to each other, working out where we can identify issues that are common to us all and try and fix them. And in my constituency, I'm very proud of things that this government have helped me deliver since I was elected in 2015. All of my secondary schools have now moved to good or outstanding. I had the Secretary of State for Health come and spend time seeing our health service joined up with our social care team on Friday of last. And that made me very proud to see all these amazing leaders really working as one, working together. And again, I think that's a very good example for Parliament. Now, of course, I'm not naive. I recognise the opposition have to oppose and the government have to govern. I'm also not so naive that there are not big challenges in my constituency. That's why I'll be having a task force on homelessness, because I've noticed the streets in Bexhill getting worse. I've also noticed more casework from my constituents because there are not this levels of services available that there once were. So, of course, many points made by opposition members are correct. But equally, we now have more people in employment than we ever have done before. So it can't all be as bad as is being said on that side of the bench, and perhaps it can't all be as good as is sometimes said on this side of the bench. If we all took that attitude into this place and worked out how we could fix things which really matter to people, we might also be able to fix the issues of Brexit. But I will touch, to my point, on a matter that I thought we'd have got fixed by now when I got elected in 2015, social care reform. It's within us in this House to fix things for the most vulnerable and often the most elderly people in our communities. We agree on so much. A wealth tax set on this side, opposite of the House. On our side, in our manifesto, we talked a lot more about the fact that people should pay more. We're almost there, yet our hatred sometimes of each other just stops us reaching out. And when it comes to reaching out, Mr. Speaker, there's one thing I would like my government to do to really show that they are listening. The charge of £65 for an EU citizen to maintain and have the same rights that they enjoyed before we in this country took the step in the referendum. That does not feel fair to me, and I speak to many on both sides of the chamber who also feel it's not fair. Surely, if the government is listening, we reach out not just to them, but also to every member in this House who agrees with that, be they Leavers or Remainers, and really offer that olive branch. If we start in that particular way, perhaps others will appreciate the government is listening, and perhaps then we will work better together in the manner that our constituents expect from us all.
Alison Thewlis.
Mr. Speaker, I have no confidence in this government, and I never have done. I've got no confidence because of the way that the DWP treat people. I have no confidence because of the constituent who was sanctioned because they were visiting their dying father. I've got no confidence because my constituents was sanctioned while waiting to start a job with the DWP. Yep. I've got no sanction because of the way that people are treated on PIP. I've got no confidence because of the way that the two-child policy and the rape clause has been pursued against vulnerable women in our society, and it must be scrapped. I have no confidence because of the closure of Glasgow's job centres. I have no confidence because of the implementation of the hostile environment, of refugees left waiting, and of constituents who have not been able to be with their families. I have no confidence because of the constituent who lost out on his wife's visa because he was under the threshold by £7, Mr. Speaker. I have no confidence in this government because of the good character test that's being applied to children who can't get citizenship because this government thinks they are not of good character enough. And, Mr. Speaker, while we are on good character, I've got no confidence in this government because the Home Office told my constituent he could not get citizenship because he had volunteered with the Red Cross, and that was a sign of bad character too. I have no confidence in this government because of their pursuance of Section 3225 of the immigration rules, where people lost out on getting leave to remain because they had made a legitimate change to their tax returns and the government thought that that was somehow wrong. I have no confidence in this government because of their abject failure to deal with Scottish limited partnerships and to reform Companies House. It's almost as if they like money laundering in this country, Mr. Speaker. I have no confidence in this government because of the refusal, despite all evidence, to allow Glasgow to pursue supervised drug consumption rooms. It is well expected that drug deaths in Scotland will top 1,000 this coming year, but the government refuses to do so for ideological reasons. I have absolutely no confidence in them for doing so. I have no confidence in this government because they fail to realise that young people deserve a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. The under-25s are not worth the same when they go out to work, and that this pretendy living wage fails to give people the dignity and work that they deserve. I have no confidence in this government because of their failure to tackle the real present danger that Brexit will cause to all of our constituents. That they put their head in their sand, that they refuse to accept the single market and the customs union as the best way forward. And, Mr. Speaker, I do have confidence in the people in my constituency. I have confidence in the people of Glasgow and the people of Scotland who voted for independence with such hope in 2014. And I know that when Scotland gets its chance again, it will have no confidence in this government and lots of confidence listen themselves.
Here. James Cartledge.
Mr. Speaker, and I am sure, Mr. Speaker, at some point in your life it is possible that you have owned a copy of that famous political book, The Downing Street Years, by Margaret Thatcher. And if so, given your memory, you may well recall the opening sentence of that book. The very first words read, "Ayes 311, noes 310. The result of the no-confidence vote in 1979, which brought Margaret Thatcher to power." And I say to my colleagues tonight, how would you feel if in a few years from now, browsing in the bookstore was a copy of The Downing Street Years by the Leader of the Opposition, and the opening sentence was a narrow defeat in a vote of confidence which led to a new era in British politics? Because we all know that it wouldn't be like the new era that the previous one I referred to brought in. 1979, it ushered in an era when free enterprise became back in the heart of British politics. We went through the difficult period of adjustment of our economy that culminated in the end of socialism and the fall of the Berlin Wall, the greatest victory in the history of modern conservatism. Instead, we would bring in a different era. All of that would be turned back. A return to nationalisation, command and control, the idea that the state knows best. Confiscatory tax rates, not education, but regulation. And I say this to you, Mr. Speaker, I am proud to stand on this side tonight. I became a Conservative after seeing what it was like in Eastern Europe, my experience of the true face of that supposedly compassionate ideology. And those who turned a blind eye to it should be ashamed of it. I started with Callaghan. I'm going to finish with Callaghan, Mr. Speaker. Not the former Labour Prime Minister, but Detective Inspector Harry Callaghan of the San Francisco Police Department. Because I say, if anyone thinks it's a good idea that Labour win the no-confidence vote tonight and then get into power, all I can say is, I hope you're feeling lucky.
Clive Lewis.
Some members opposite have been calling into question the motivations of the opposition for calling this no-confidence vote. Let's be clear, Mr. Speaker, yesterday's vote wasn't just a defeat, it was a complete and utter rout. Now, some members in today's debate have been talking about historical parallels, but I think if that had been a battle, it would have to compare to the Battle of Cannae, where Hannibal annihilated the Roman army. A textbook defeat, just like last night, was a textbook example of arrogance and hubris in government. But, you know, last night's vote aside, let's run through some of the myriad of reasons why I and we on this side of the House have no confidence in this government. In-work poverty at 4 million people. Homelessness soaring. Yesterday, in my city of Norwich and Norfolk, 38 out of 53 of our children's centres are being closed. Why? Because Norfolk County Council have said this government's cuts are forcing that on them. A day of complete shame in my city. And without a hint of irony, this government, whilst closing down our children's centres, has declared Norwich an opportunity area as it attempts to improve failing social mobility. Mr. Speaker, it's a policy akin to attempting to fit up a bath with no plug. In education, schools face real terms funding cuts. In The Guardian today, Norfolk County Council again in the media, under fire from the local government ombudsman for failing to address and to look after the concerns of children with special education needs. On mental health, after the PM personally promised to improve this Cinderella service, Norfolk and Suffolk Mental Health Foundation Trust has been put into special measures again, 3 times in 4 years. The first of any trust in the country that has happened to. Real terms funding at this day and age now down 13%, demand up by 50%. But I also want to turn to an issue that I believe this House and particularly this government have failed to adequately address, and that's the impending climate catastrophe and biodiversity loss. This, above all else, given the timescales that we are talking, is basically a calamity waiting to happen that this government is comprehensively failing on. Time after time, we hear the greenwash from the benches opposite that they are going to do what it takes to do on the environment. They slash soda subsidies, 9,000 job losses. fracking has been announced and put forward and is now actually happening. But not just in this country, they're also doing it in China as well, with taxpayers' money. The climate science tells us that you need to leave this in the ground, 80% of it. It can't happen. And in the words of that famous Delia Smith, that legend of Norwich, I will say to the benches opposite, let's be having ya, let's have that general election, let's have that vote, support this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are moments in this chamber for political knockabout. There are moments in this chamber for consensus. And there are moments in this chamber for constructive debate. And I am very, very disappointed that at this point in time, when we have such an important, momentous decision to make about how we take forwards our exit from the European Union, we are having this debate today. But I appreciate that yesterday's vote is the reason why it's been called. But what would make this maybe slightly better would be if it wasn't the fact the Leader of the Opposition hasn't just called this debate now, but all he's said for weeks and weeks and months, whenever he's been asked his position on Brexit, he's been unable to give a clear answer. All he's been able to do is say he wants a general election. And he continues. I sincerely hope that after this evening, when I believe he will lose this vote, he will move on and start giving some clarity on his position on Brexit. But it is simply not fair to the country that the opposition cannot put together their own position. At this point in time, when I recognise that here in Parliament we need to come together and solve how we leave the European Union. That is what businesses, particularly my constituents, are calling for us to do, is move forward and get on with it. But also what I hear from businesses more often than not is not that their concern is so much about the uncertainty of Brexit, it's what would happen if the Leader of the Opposition were to become Prime Minister, and if his party and his hard-left version of Labour were to take charge of our economy and our country, because that would be the worst possible thing for our country. I would have no confidence on behalf of my constituents of what he and his government would do for our economy, our security, or even for our public services. He may claim to be a champion of our public services. Not only would they be completely unsustainable, unfundable under his economic model, but also have no confidence that he'd be able to improve their performance, as we have in government, whether it's in schools, where children are now learning to read, which is the fundamentals for them having a better opportunity in life, whether it's in the National Health Service, where, as we heard last week, we now have a long-term plan for a sustainable National Health Service and funded sustainably. So I look forward to for us to continue delivering on these commitments in government. But first, we need to move on and deliver Brexit. These are difficult times, not just in the UK, but for countries across the Western world. We need to come together, we need to move forward, we need to deliver on Brexit, continue making Britain a better place to live, and build our place in the world outside the European Union.
Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the Leader of the Opposition's motion. As a teacher and head teacher throughout my career, trust has always been very important to me. The trust children had in me as their teacher, and the trust that teachers had in me as their head teacher, to understand their needs and make the right decisions on their behalf. Trust in relationships and in the workplace is crucial. Today, this debate isn't about whether the Prime Minister has the ability to make decisions on our behalf. It's about whether we trust her to understand the mood of the country, the zeitgeist and the needs of every region and demographic, and make the right decisions. This government has suffered the biggest parliamentary defeat in history, been found in contempt of Parliament, overseen the steepest rise in poverty, and averaged a resignation per month. I trust the Leader of our opposition and the shadow front bench as people who understand the struggles that many in our country are facing. I trust them to have the compassion and intellect to understand and empathise with the people of this country, and to be able to make the decisions which will improve all our lives. Is the Prime Minister a good public servant? Yes. Does she work hard? Yes. Do I respect her? Yes. I respect anyone who devotes their life to public service. But is the Prime Minister a diplomat? Does she show warmth and empathy? Is she able to negotiate with the other 27 countries in the EU in our interests? Clearly not. I don't trust our Prime Minister to represent our country and to negotiate a deal which is in the best interest of the people of Combe Valley, my constituents, or our country. For me, this is not just about whether we are in the EU or not. It's about the kind of society I want my granddaughter to live in.
Absolutely.
Just before Christmas, my 5-year-old granddaughter came into Parliament for the first time and she loved it. Fast forward 30 years when she's a grown woman. Do I want her to inherit the world determined by this government? No, I don't. No. I wonder how she will judge this government's handling of Brexit when she's a grown woman. I see it as a full-blown display of incompetence focused purely on party interests and failing to take strong action to protect jobs and the economy, workers' rights and environmental protections and national security. I don't trust this government with my constituents' future, my granddaughter's future or our country's future. I have therefore no confidence in this government. I do trust a person like the opposition leader to understand diplomacy.
Thank you. Jack Brereton.
Speaker, when I was elected, my constituents in Stoke-on-Trent South were quite clear. They voted overwhelmingly for Brexit, and they were overwhelmingly in rejection of what this Labour Party has become and what it now stands for. The Momentum-led Labour Party does not represent predominantly working-class communities like mine in the Midlands and the North. Years of Labour has done nothing to improve my city in Stoke-on-Trent, quite the reverse, decimating our local industries with our local communities taking the brunt and being left behind. Since Conservatives came to power, Stoke-on-Trent's industries have started to blossom again, with record numbers of people working and the best places to start a new business now being Stoke-on-Trent. This success is thanks to, yes, the hard work of our businesses and our communities, but most significantly, the policies of Conservatives. We have seen a government that has transformed our economy from the ruins of Labour's crash to one of the most successful developed economies. By supporting local businesses to grow, invest and take on more people, we have seen over 3.4 million more people in work, with unemployment at a record low, measures to keep taxes low and introducing a national living wage. A basic rate taxpayer is now over £1,200 better off than they were in 2010.
Order. The honourable gentleman, I know that the House is excited, but the honourable gentleman must get a respectful hearing. Jack Brereton.
Mr. Speaker, we must continue to pursue measures which will help address the cost of living and focus on growing aspirations, creating better opportunities and job prospects for our communities. This would be threatened by a Labour government led by the Leader of the Opposition. Their unfunded plans of £1 trillion of extra spending would see us racking up huge debts and mean massive tax rises for people in constituencies like mine who can least afford. And for what? Ideologically motivated white elephants, nationalisations of our industries, raiding the public purse to pursue policies which have been tried and failed time and again, threatening jobs in our industries and our economic prosperity. Every time we've had a Labour government, they have left our country with more people out of work than they started. And as I've said many times before, my constituency in Stoke-on-Trent South voted overwhelmingly to leave. At every opportunity, I have voted in this House to enact Brexit and deliver for the wishes of my constituents. For this House to go against that and the British public, and most of my constituents voted for, would be a total betrayal of democracy. But this is what the significant proportion of MPs on the benches opposite want. They have repeatedly voted for measures to thwart Brexit, frustrating and trying to prevent and delay us from leaving on the 29th of March. This motion today shows the Labour leadership would rather play party politics than put the national interest in our country first. The Labour leader has been clear. They want a general election, going against the majority who are fed up with politicians and want us to get on with delivering for our country.
Paul Sweeney!
When I think of the confidence I have in this government, I think about how it's treated the most vulnerable people in our country. And when I think of my constituents, I think of a 10-year-old boy who was orphaned when his mother died, and this government, instead of nurturing him and trying to care for him and provide him with security, threatened to deport him. I thought that was a most shameful act, a disgrace, and is typical of this government's hostile environment policy. And that is why I have no confidence in this government, for that and many other reasons, about how it's treated my constituents and many vulnerable people across this country, but also how they have handled this negotiation in such a feckless and dysfunctional manner. They couldn't agree ahead of time what the negotiating objectives were. There was no spirit of collaboration. Even after the Prime Minister lost her majority in this place, there was no attempt to form a collegiate basis to agree negotiating objectives for this country and to deliver for this country's national interest. That was not achieved. Indeed, this government has subverted democracy at every turn when it suited its interests, even though it does not command a majority of the popular consent of the people, or even a majority in this House of Commons. It has packed its select committees with Tory majorities, even though it is a hung parliament, by procedural sleight of hand. It repeatedly seeks to circumvent or abuse the SEAL conventions in its dealings with the devolved administrations. And indeed, this government became the first administration in parliamentary history to be held in contempt of Parliament. I have to give way to my honourable friend.
Does my honourable friend agree that in Scotland people will be watching this thinking it's an absolute shambles? It's been absolutely roughshod over, and we have no trust, no faith at all in this government. We need a general election now.
We absolutely need a general election, because there is no way to clear this impasse. There is a clear lack of faith in the government. There is a clear lack of will from the government to engage productively in reaching out to build a national consensus to achieve the way forward. It is now the job of Parliament to take control, and the only way to do that is to reset the clock, have a general election, allow a new mandate to be formed in the interest of delivering for the people of this country. That is the only way to do it, and that is why I will be supporting the motion of the Leader of the Opposition tonight to bring down this failing government and deliver a mandate that will act in the national interest of this country.
Yes, 1 minute. 2 minutes. Luke Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'll try and keep this very short. I rise tonight in support of this government motion, mainly because I hear the frustrations of the people in this country from my constituents, and we hear it here in this House. There is confusion, whether it is on our split party position. We're criticised for red lines, but all we hear from Labour are their blurred lines, their lack of clear direction, their inability to come with a constructive alternative to what the government is being put forward. Mr. Speaker, parties of all colours failed to make a constructive case for the United Kingdom's position in the European Union. And many contributions we've heard in this chamber this afternoon have lamented that fact. Many of them have been driven by anger, and that's fine. Anger is an easy emotion, and it's one that many of our constituents feel. But when party politics fail and policies fall down is when MPs need to step up. And that's what we need to do in the coming weeks. What's come from the defeat last night is a clear determination from my right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, to reach out across this chamber, to come back with different proposals, to listen to people from across the political spectrum, and not those who stand up in this chamber and say they work in the national interest, but they only work in the nationalist interest, but actually those MPs who are here to genuinely serve their constituents and protect and preserve our United Kingdom. Mr. Speaker, it is incredibly easy to criticise, but we cannot abdicate our responsibilities as members of Parliament for what we were elected to do. Our constituents don't want another general election, they want us to get on with our jobs.
Tom Watson.
Mr. Speaker, this has been a very passionately argued debate with over, as at my count, 59 members giving speeches where they were not holding back. And the scene was set by the Honourable Member for Christchurch, who said at the start that the Prime Minister must accept the verdict of the House last night. And the necessity for that was underpinned by my right honourable friend, the Member for Knowsley, who highlighted the fact that she is a Prime Minister with no majority and no authority, which is perhaps why the Honourable Member for Ross, Skye and Lochaber talked about the PM's record level of a lack of humility, and the Right Honourable Member for Twickenham, in what I thought was a thoughtful speech, spoke of the government's arrogant approach to these negotiations. Why is that so important? Because, as my honourable friend, the Member for Wallasey, said, The UK is more divided and fearful for the future than ever before. Now, we have had some comic moments in this debate. I was particularly amused by the Honourable Member for Mid-Norfolk's contribution, his Life of Brian speech, which is an homage to one of the greatest satirical farces in British film history. Very appropriate for the times we are in. And the Honourable Member for Brentford and Ongar talked about the Conservative Party rebonding in the long lobbies tonight. Now, I can't fail to note the passionate and sometimes breathless critiques of the last 9 years of austerity economics by colleagues on my side of the House, particularly the members for Gedling, Ilford North, Warrington North, Hull West and Hessle. And a special prize must go to the Honourable Member for Dudley South, who at very short notice gave a 4-minute speech in 3 minutes by speaking 25% faster. Now, Mr. Speaker, as the Prime Minister said earlier in this debate, this is a crucial moment in our nation's history. But it is an unenviable task to summarise this debate today and to ask members of this House to pass judgment on her stewardship of our country. First, let me say very clearly that I am not one of those people who questions her motives. I agree with the Honourable Member for Stirling, who claimed she was motivated by public duty. I don't doubt that she has sincerely attempted to fulfil the task given to us by the voters in this referendum. I have no doubt, too, that she has tried her best and given it her all. But she has failed. And I'm afraid the failure is hers. And it's hers alone. And I'm certain that every member of this House admires her resilience. To suffer the humiliations on a global stage that she has done would have finished off weaker people far sooner. Yet the reality is that if the Prime Minister really sat down and thought carefully about the implications of that defeat last night for our country, she would have resigned. Throughout history, Prime Ministers have tried their best and failed. There's no disgrace in that. That's politics. But this Prime Minister has chosen one last act of defiance, not just defying the laws of politics, but defying the laws of mathematics. And it was Disraeli who said, "A majority is always better than the best repartee." She is a Prime Minister without a majority for her flagship policy, with no authority and no plan B. 432 to 202. Mr. Speaker, that is not a mere flesh wound. No one doubts her determination, which is generally an admirable quality, but misapplied it can be toxic. And the cruelest truth of all is that she doesn't possess the necessary skills, the political skills, the empathy, the ability, and most crucially, the policy to lead this country any longer. Now, I know there are many good people in the government. They will be examining their consciences as the clock runs down on these Brexit negotiations. Because she has refused to resign, we now face a choice between a general election to sort out this mess or continued paralysis under her leadership. But now the ante has been raised. The government has been defeated on a Brexit plan that has been its sole reason for existing for the past 2.5 years. It has not just been defeated on the most crucial issue facing our country, it has suffered the worst defeat of any British government in history. And the clock is ticking. MPs have shown that they're ready to take back control over what has been, from start to finish, a failed Brexit process. But the question facing the House tonight is whether it is worth giving this failed Prime Minister another chance to go back pleading to Brussels. Another opportunity to humiliate the United Kingdom. Another few weeks to waste precious time. Our answer tonight must be a resounding no. And let me remind you why. It was this Prime Minister who chose to lay down red lines that never commanded the support of Parliament. It was this Prime Minister who refused to guarantee the rights of EU nationals who've made their lives and their homes in this country. It was this Prime Minister who time and again tried to shut Parliament out, refusing to give us a meaningful vote, refusing to release the legal advice to the deal. She's treated this place and its members on all sides with utter disdain. Mr. Speaker, it was the member for Gainsborough who said the road to tyranny is paved with executives ignoring Parliament. Yet that is what she has done. And so Parliament is having to assert its rightful authority. And at every turn, she has chosen division over unity. She's not tried to bring the 17 million people that voted Leave and the 16 million people that voted Remain together. She should have tried to assure those who voted Remain. Instead, she chose to placate the most extreme of her colleagues on the Leave side of the debate. That has left the nation more divided than it was in June 2016. Out on the streets, in homes, in schools, in hospitals, people are struggling and take no hope and no strength from this ailing government. What happened to those burning injustices she said it was her mission to fight when she came into office? Racism, classism, homelessness, insecure jobs. They've all grown and burned brighter than ever before. And for so much of this, she is responsible. If the House declares its no confidence in the government tonight, it will open the possibility of a general election and a decisive change in direction for our country on Brexit, a decisive change in direction for workers, for young people and for our vital services. Mr. Speaker, the Right Honourable Lady will forever be known as the nothing has changed Prime Minister. But something must change. So our only choice left is to change her and her government in a general election. We know she's worked hard, but the truth is she's too set in her ways, too aloof to lead. She lacks the imagination and agility to bring people with her. She lacks the authority on the world stage to negotiate this deal. Ultimately, she has failed. It's not through lack of effort. It's not through lack of dedication. And I think the country recognises that effort. In fact, the country feels genuinely sorry for the Prime Minister. I feel sorry for the Prime Minister. But she cannot confuse pity for political legitimacy, sympathy for sustainable support. The evidence is clear, and I know that out of loyalty to party, members opposite will want to support the Prime Minister in the vote this evening. But everyone in this chamber, no matter which lobby they go through tonight, know in their hearts that this Prime Minister is not capable of getting a deal through. The members on the opposite benches know it. They know, we know that they know it. The country knows it, which is why we must act. That is why we need something new. That is why we need a general election. I commend this motion to the House.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, having sat throughout this entire debate, it has been a passionate debate characterised by many excellent speeches, and I commend the members for Tiverton and Honiton, Bolton West, East Surrey, Mid Norfolk, Plymouth Moor View, Broxtowe, Stirling, Dudley South, Faversham and Stoke-on-Trent South on my side for a series of outstanding speeches. But it has also been the case, as the Shadow Secretary of State pointed out, that there have been many powerful speeches from the opposition benches as well. And I too, like him, want to pay particular tribute to the members for Warrington North, Gedling, Ilford North and Birmingham Hodge Hill for moving and passionate speeches. Their constituencies are lucky to have them as advocates for their concerns and their needs. But perhaps the bravest and the finest speech that came from the opposition benches was given by the member for Barrow in Furness. It takes courage. It takes courage, and he has it, having been elected on a Labour mandate, representing working-class people, to say that the leader of the party that you joined as a boy is not fit to be Prime Minister. He speaks for his constituents. He speaks for the country. And that takes me to the speech from the Shadow Secretary of State. He spoke well. But I felt he did not rise to the level of events. But one thing that was characteristic about his speech, he did not once mention in his speech the leader of the opposition or why he should be Prime Minister. Now, he doesn't want him to be Prime Minister. I have a lot of time for the honourable member. We have several things in common. He's lost weight recently. Sorry, we've both lost weight recently, I should say. Him much more so. We're both friends of Israel. Him much more so. And we both recognise that the member for Islington North is about the worst possible person to lead the Labour Party. Him much more so. Now, as well as great speeches from the backbenches, we also had some interesting speeches from the front benches. We had a speech of over 20 minutes from my great friend, the leader of the Scottish National Party in this place. But again, in those 20 minutes, he did not once mention the common fisheries policy. I think everyone in Scotland who recognises the potential to free ourselves from the common fisheries policy which Brexit provides will note that in 20 minutes of precious parliamentary time, the SNP didn't mention them, aren't interested in them, and as far as the fishing people of Scotland are concerned, the SNP have literally nothing to say. I turn to the speech from the leader of the Liberal Democrats, someone whom I also have affection and respect for, and he made a number of good points. But he also said that he regretted the referendum. This from the party that was the first in this House to say that we should have a referendum on EU membership. And because he doesn't like the result of the last referendum, he now wants another referendum. The Liberal Democrat policy on referendums is not the policy of Gladstone or Lloyd George, it's the policy of Vicky Pollard. No, but yeah, but no, but yeah. I should also commend the speech given by the leader of the Democratic Unionist Party. He explained that he had been inundated with text messages today from people who were saying, please, 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 people in this House, please, please, please back the government tonight. And some of those text messages had even come from Conservatives. And I think, critically, when we think about confidence in this country and in this government, there is a daily vote of confidence which is being executed by the individuals investing in this country, creating jobs and opportunity for all our citizens. Under this government, this country remains the most successful country for foreign direct investment of any country in Europe, with more than £1.3 billion being invested in the last year. That is why Forbes magazine says that this country is the best destination for new jobs in the world. It's why the independent organisation JLL say the best place for the future of services in the world is here in the United Kingdom. It is why, once again, London has been recorded by independent inspectors as the best place in the world for tech investment. And we see that when Spanish rail firms like Talgo shortlist 6 destinations for investment for new rolling stock, all 6 in the United Kingdom. When Boeing opened a new factory in Sheffield to create jobs for British workers. When Chanel moved from France to London in order to establish a new corporate headquarters.
Smells good.
And when Starbucks moved from Amsterdam to London in order to ensure more investment and jobs. The opposition should wake up and smell the coffee. And all of this, in the words of the BBC, despite Brexit. Now that investment, those jobs that have been created under my right honourable friend the Prime Minister's inspirational leadership, has been invested in public services and social justice. As we heard from the member for Dudley South and Bexhill and Battle, 1.9 million more children in good and outstanding schools. It is also the case that the gap between the poorest and the richest in our schools has narrowed under this Conservative government. We also have a record level of investment in the NHS, and thanks to my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State for Health, a 10-year plan, £20 billion investment, £394 million extra every week for our NHS. And we also have investment in our national security. We meet the 2% target for investment in NATO, and we have 2 new aircraft carriers capable of projecting British force and influence across the world in defence of freedom and democracy. And in contrast, while we are standing up for national security, what about the right honourable gentleman, the member for Islington North? He wants to leave NATO. He wants to get rid of our nuclear deterrent. And recently in a speech he said, why do countries boast about the size of their armies? That is quite wrong. Why don't we emulate Costa Rica that has no army at all? No allies, no deterrent, no army. No way can this country ever allow that man to be our Prime Minister and in charge of our national security. But if he can't support our fighting men and women, no. Who does he support? Who does he stand beside? Well, it was fascinating to discover that the right honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was there when a wreath was laid. A wreath was laid to commemorate those who were involved in the massacre at the Munich Olympics of Israeli athletes. Now, he says he was present but not involved. Present but not involved sums him up when it comes to national security. When this House voted to bomb the fascists of ISIS after an inspirational speech by the member for Leeds Central, in which 66 people, including the Shadow Secretary of State, voted with this government in order to defeat fascism, I'm afraid that the honourable gentleman, the Leader of the Opposition, was not with us. In fighting fascism, he was present but not involved. And similarly, when this House voted to take the action necessary, when Vladimir Putin executed an act of terrorism on our soil, there were many Labour members, many good Labour members, who stood up to support what we were doing, but not the right honourable gentleman. When we were
Point of order, Daniel Rennie. If it is a genuine point of order.
The government, how is this relevant? And is this not dangerous?
If the Secretary of State were out of order, I'd have said so. I didn't, because he isn't. Secretary of State.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And if the Leader of the Opposition won't stand up against Putin when he attacks people in this country, if he won't stand up against fascists when they are running riot in Syria, if he will not stand up for this country when critical national security questions are being asked, how can we possibly expect him to stand up for us in European negotiations? Will he stand up for us against Spain over Gibraltar? Will he stand up against the Commission in order to ensure that we get a good deal? Of course he won't, because he won't even stand up for his own members of Parliament. Why is it that a Labour member of Parliament needs armed protection at her own party conference? Why is it that nearly half of female Labour MPs wrote to the Leader of the Opposition to say that he was not standing up against the vilification and the abuse that they received online, which was being carried out in his name? If he cannot protect his own members of Parliament, if he cannot protect the proud traditions of the Labour Party, how can he possibly protect this country? We cannot have confidence in him to lead. We have confidence in this government, which is why I commend this motion.
Order! Under the order of the House! Under the order of the House of today, I am now required to put the question. The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Division! Clear the lobby! Order. The question is that this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tellers for the ayes, Jessica Morden and Jeff Smith. Tellers for the noes, Julian Smith and Christopher Pincher. the doors!
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325.
The ayes to the right, 306. The noes to the left, 325. So the noes have it. The noes have it. Unlock. Point of order, the Prime Minister.
On a point of order, Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased that this House has expressed its confidence in the government tonight. I do not take this responsibility lightly, and my government will continue its work to increase our prosperity, guarantee our security, and to strengthen our union. And yes, we will also continue to work to deliver on the solemn promise we made to the people of this country to deliver on the result of the referendum and leave the European Union. I believe this duty is shared by every member of this House, and we have a responsibility to identify a way forward that can secure the backing of the House. To that end, I've proposed a series of meetings between senior parliamentarians and representatives of the government over the coming days, and I would like to invite the leaders of parliamentary parties to meet with me individually, and I would like to start these meetings tonight. Mr. Speaker, the government approaches these meetings in a constructive spirit, and I urge others to do the same. But we must find solutions that are negotiable and command sufficient support in this House. And, as I've said, we will return to the House on Monday to table an amendable motion and to make a statement about the way forward. The House has put its confidence in this government. I stand ready to work with any member of this House to deliver on Brexit and ensure that this House retains the confidence of the British people.
Point of order, Mr. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night the House rejected the government's conclusion of its negotiations with the European...
Order. I called the Prime Minister on a point of order, and the Prime Minister was heard. And she was heard in relative tranquillity and certainly with courtesy. And the same courtesy will be extended to the Leader of the Opposition and to others who seek to raise points of order. That's the way it is. Jeremy Corbyn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, the House rejected the government's deal, emphatically. A week ago, the House voted to condemn the idea of a no-deal Brexit. Before there can be any positive discussions about the way forward, the government must remove clearly, once and for all, the prospect of the catastrophe of a no-deal Brexit from the EU and all the chaos that would come as a result of that. And I invite the Prime Minister to confirm now that the government will not countenance a no-deal Brexit from the European Union.
A point of order, Mr. Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I must say that I welcome the offer of talks from the Prime Minister. I think it's important, Mr. Speaker, that all of us recognise the responsibility that we have, and on the back of the defeat of the government's motion last night, that we have to work together where we can to find a way forward. I commit the Scottish National Party to working constructively with the government. However, I do think it's important. I do think it is important in that regard that we make it clear to the Prime Minister, in the spirit of openness in these talks, that the issue of extending Article 50 of a people's vote and avoiding a no deal have to be on the table. We have to agree to enter these talks on the basis that we can move forward and achieve a result which will unify all the nations of the United Kingdom.
Thank you. Point of order, Sir Edward Davey, and then I'll come to the right honourable gentleman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. From the Liberal Democrat position, we are clear that we want to engage with talks with Her Majesty's government. But it's very important that the government makes clear that no deal is not an option. it's very, very important that the Prime Minister, as she actually, to be fair to her, earlier today didn't do, rule out extending Article 50. It's important that the House has that chance to think and come together. And finally, I would ask the Prime Minister, will she ensure, Mr. Speaker, that this House gets a chance to take control of our own business as we go through the next few days and weeks?
Thank you. Point of order, Mr. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, and the result of the motion of no confidence tonight illustrates the importance of the confidence and supply arrangement that is currently in place between. I'm always delighted when our opponents illustrate the strength of that relationship that we have and what it's delivering for Northern Ireland. And when the people of Northern Ireland see that investment in education and health and infrastructure, they will thank this Parliament and they will thank this party and this government for that extra investment. But can I say this? Can I say this?
Order, Mr. Stone. Normally, order. Very unseemly behaviour. Normally you behave with great dignity in this place. Calm yourself, man. Get a grip. Nigel Dodds.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. Can I say, however, that the confidence and supply arrangement, of course, is built upon delivering Brexit on the basis of our shared priorities. And for us, that is the Union. And we want to deliver Brexit, taking back control of our laws, our border and our money, and we leave the European Union as one country. Let us work in the coming days to achieve that objective.
Well, on ground, well, if the right honourable gentleman really feels he must. But he has been represented by his right honourable friend. But if he really wants to, briefly, I don't mind. But we really must move on. No. Well, there's a generosity of spirit. Mr. Alistair Carmichael.
For her assurance, Mr. Speaker, that the motion that will be brought on Monday will be amendable. And can I seek your guidance about how we, on this side of the House, and indeed on that side of the House as well, who want to see this matter put to a people's vote, might on Monday be given the opportunity to do so, including the opportunity given to the Leader of the Opposition, now that we know there is not to be a general election?
Response to the right honourable gentleman, apart from thanking him for his point of order, is to say that if there is an amendable motion of which the Prime Minister, on behalf of the government, has given notice, manifestly there will be an opportunity for people to table amendments, and we shall have then to see what happens. The right honourable gentleman wouldn't expect me to make a commitment in advance, but I know what he thinks and I've heard what he said. We come now to the adjournment. The whip to move.
I beg to move this House to now adjourn.
Thank you. The question is that this House do now adjourn. Honourable members do not wish to hear the honourable gentleman, the member for Solihull, dilate on the matter of car production in Solihull, which seems an unaccountable choice on their part. I hope that they will leave the chamber quickly and quietly so that the occupant of the chair can hear the honourable gentleman deliver his oration.
He must have been. That makes one of us. Yeah? Who's one to be? That's no problem. I'll
live service. This is the primary audio circuit for the Reuters live service.